All right, so, cloud computing, it's everywhere, right? But how do we actually make it sustainable? Because it can't just be about using less energy, right?
You're absolutely right. It's way more than just flipping a switch. It's about thinking about the bigger picture. I think the term cloud sustainability, it's about making sure those cloud choices match up with the company's overall sustainability goals.
Okay, so strategy is just as important as the tech itself. I was looking at this cloud sustainability FinOps framework capability, and honestly, the title alone almost scared me off.
Yeah, I get it. Not the catchiest name, is it?
Yeah.
But try not to think of it as like a technical manual. It's more like a roadmap. It's designed to help any organization, no matter where they're starting from, to really integrate sustainability into how they use the cloud.
And one thing I like is how they use that crawl, walk, run model. Makes the whole thing less intimidating, Like you don't have to become a sustainability expert overnight.
Exactly. It's all about taking those manageable steps.
Now, one thing that really jumped out at me was how much it emphasizes different roles and responsibilities. It's not just an IT department problem to solve, right? It seems like it touches everything.
You're hitting on something really important. One of the things this framework does well is show how cloud sustainability needs a whole team effort. You've got your FinOps practitioners, your product teams, your engineers, all these different groups have a part to play.
So the big question is, how do you get everyone on the same page, working towards the same goal? Like, what are some concrete examples of what these roles are actually doing differently to make this happen?
Let's start with the FinOps practitioner, for example. They're like the sustainability champions within an organization. They're the ones looking at the data, tracking the environmental impact, and making sure everyone understands what's going on.
So if someone listening is in IT, this could be someone they start working with more and more, someone who can help them understand the impact of their decisions on sustainability.
Exactly. And then you've got your product teams. They need to be thinking about sustainability right from the get-go when they're designing new products or features that rely on the cloud.
So it's about changing the entire process, not just trying to tack on sustainability as an afterthought.
Exactly. A fundamental shift. And you can see that reflected in how this framework breaks down these roles and what they're responsible for.
And it's not just talk, right? This framework gets into actually measuring the impact of cloud use. We're not just talking about carbon emissions here, are we? There's more to it than just that one number.
You're right. It goes way beyond just carbon. We're talking about a whole range of sustainability metrics, things like water usage, even the waste that's generated. This framework stresses having these detailed sustainability reports, and not just once a year, alongside your regular cost reports.
Okay, that's interesting. So concrete data points. What kind of stuff are we actually measuring, and why is it so important to track it all?
Well, think of it this way. Companies are being held accountable for their environmental impact more than ever, right? Regulations are getting tougher. Investors are asking tougher questions. Customers really care about this stuff. These reports, they're not just for show. They show a real commitment to using the cloud responsibly.
It's like if you don't measure it, you can't improve it, right?
Exactly. And by keeping track of these metrics, companies can see where they can make the biggest difference, right? Maybe they can use more energy-efficient data centers or streamline their workloads, maybe even switch to renewable energy for their cloud use.
That makes a lot of sense. But how does this affect our listeners, the people who aren't CEOs or sustainability gurus? How will understanding this stuff matter to them in their day-to-day work, regardless of what they do?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? We're reaching a point where understanding these metrics isn't just for a sustainability team tucked away somewhere. Product managers might have to think about the carbon footprint of a new feature. Engineers need to write code with energy efficiency in mind. Even marketing teams need to understand and talk about the sustainability of their products.
So you're saying in the future, knowing the basics of this stuff, it's going to be like knowing how to use a spreadsheet, just a core skill everyone needs.
Exactly. And this framework recognizes that. It's becoming a core part of how businesses work, from top to bottom.
Which leads to another big point, the balance between cost and sustainability. Let's be real, sometimes the most sustainable choice isn't the cheapest one, at least in the short term. How does this framework handle that?
That is the million-dollar question, right? The framework acknowledges that this is a real issue. It's not about always picking the cheapest option. It's about making smart trade-offs that look at both the financial impact and the environmental impact, finding that sweet spot where you get the best overall value.
So not just throwing money at the problem, but being strategic and thinking long term.
Yes. And sometimes, those choices that seem more expensive up front, those sustainable ones, they actually save money in the long run.
Got any examples of that where sustainability and cost effectiveness actually go hand in hand?
Sure. Take energy efficiency, for example. Investing in more efficient infrastructure or
Yeah.
spending some time to optimize how you're using things, that might cost more upfront. But over time, those efforts can really cut down on your energy bills, eventually paying for themselves and then some.
Makes you wonder why more companies aren't doing it. Helping the environment and potentially saving money in the long run. Sounds like a win-win.
Right. You'd think so.
Yeah.
But one thing that struck me about this framework is how much it stresses the human element. It's not enough to have the data, right? It's about changing how people think and building a culture of sustainability in the whole organization.
Right. And I was surprised by how much it talked about the need for communication and trainings. Like, you can't just have a sustainability team off in a corner somewhere. Everyone needs to be involved. So we're talking about a real culture shift here. Everyone from the top to, the folks writing the code, everyone needs to be on board.
Absolutely. And to do that, everyone needs to be speaking the same language, right? One thing I really like about this framework is that it actually defines its terms. It doesn't just throw around jargon and assume everyone knows what it means.
Oh, that's a good point. I'll admit, even I was getting a little lost with some of the technical terms. Like, what even is FinOps anyway?
Right. Basically, it's a set of practices for managing cloud finances. But in this context, it's about making sure those financial decisions are lining up with your sustainability goals. It's about knowing how much your cloud use is costing you, not just in dollars, but in its environmental impact too.
Okay, so those two things are connected. Makes sense. What about some of those other terms? I saw embodied carbon footprint. And honestly, that one sounds a little scary, haha.
Uh-huh. It's not as bad as it sounds. It basically means the carbon emissions from making and eventually getting rid of all the physical stuff that makes cloud computing possible. All those servers, the data centers, everything.
Wow, I never really thought about that whole life cycle. Easy to forget there's all this physical stuff behind the scenes.
Exactly. And that's what I like about this framework. It gives you a structure to think about all these complex factors, not just the obvious ones.
It's like connecting the dots between those cloud services we use every day and the very real environmental impact from start to finish.
Precisely. And it's not just about defining terms. This framework actually gets into the nitty-gritty, suggesting specific things that different roles within an organization can actually do.
So it's a practical guide, something our listeners could take back to their teams.
Absolutely. For instance, it suggests that these FinOps practitioners should be working hand in hand with cloud providers to push for better, more detailed sustainability data.
Makes sense, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. But what does that look like in practice? What kind of data are we talking about?
It means going beyond just like total energy consumption, getting much more granular.
Mm.
Things like what are the carbon emissions for specific cloud services, how much water are different data centers using, even what types of energy sources are they using.
Wow, that's getting into the weeds. But I can see how having that much detail would be really helpful for decision making.
For sure. It gives companies the information they need to make choices that match their sustainability goals. And it's not enough to just have the data. It has to be easy to find and understand for everyone, right? That's why this framework highlights putting those sustainability reports right alongside the regular cost reports.
So it's all part of the same conversation, not a separate thing.
Right. You're connecting that environmental impact with the financial side of things, showing that sustainability can actually be good for business.
Now, I'm curious, don't different cloud providers have different levels of transparency when it comes to this sustainability data? Some are probably better than others, right?
You're absolutely right. That's another area where these FinOps practitioners come in. They can advocate for more transparency and standardization across the board, no matter who the provider is.
So it's not just about making things better within your own company. It's about pushing the entire industry to be more accountable.
Exactly. Imagine if you could compare the sustainability of different cloud providers just as easily as you can compare their prices today. That's the kind of transparency this framework is aiming for.
I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond just one company or one team. It's about everyone working together to make a real change.
Absolutely. No one can solve this alone. It's about collaboration, sharing what works, and pushing for those big picture changes.
It's actually pretty hopeful when you think about it. But I do have to ask, what about the people who are actually building and running this cloud infrastructure? How does this framework help them make a difference?
That's where the engineers come in, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones writing the code, designing the systems, making those daily decisions that directly affect sustainability.
So we're not just talking about the big strategies, but the everyday choices that add up, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about it. Even small decisions. where to run a workload, what kind of storage to use, how to make your code more efficient. All those little things can have a big impact on the environment. And this framework gives engineers the knowledge and the tools to factor sustainability into everything they do.
So making them aware of their impact and giving them the power to be part of the solution.
Exactly. It's about changing that mindset from just get it done to get it done sustainably.
It reminds me of this whole green software engineering thing I keep hearing about. Have you come across that?
Definitely. It's really gaining traction. Developers are getting much more aware of the environmental impact of their code and are actively looking for ways to minimize it. It's like building sustainability into the DNA of the software itself.
That's fantastic. I love seeing these kinds of shifts happening in different fields. Like sustainability is becoming a core design principle, not just an afterthought.
That's exactly it. And that's what this framework is all about, encouraging a more holistic approach to cloud computing, where sustainability is baked in from the very beginning.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. I'm actually feeling a lot more optimistic about the future of cloud computing now.
Me too. It's great to see the progress that's being made and how much momentum is building around this issue.
Couldn't agree more. But we need to take a quick break. Don't worry though, we'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into making cloud computing more sustainable. Stay tuned. And we're back, diving right back into the world of sustainable cloud computing. We've covered a lot of ground, but how do we actually know if it's working? What does a truly sustainable cloud operation look like in practice?
That's the key question, right? It's easy to talk about sustainability,
Hmm.
but how do we measure success? That's where this framework's emphasis on reporting and clear metrics comes in. Ideally, you should be able to look at a company's sustainability reports and see their cloud's impact just as clearly as you can see their financial performance.
So basically, more transparency is key.
Exactly. And it's not enough for that data to just be out there somewhere. It needs to be easily accessible, understandable to everyone involved. This framework actually talks about integrating sustainability metrics into those regular reporting workflows, so it's not treated as separate.
So it's part of the everyday conversation, not just a separate report card?
Precisely. Imagine your company's dashboard. Right next to the financial figures, you see your cloud usages, carbon footprint, water consumption, all of it.
Wow, that would change things. Hard to ignore the impact then.
Exactly. And to really drive things home, the framework even suggests setting specific targets, things like carbon budgets, and making sure those targets are communicated across the entire organization so everyone understands their role in achieving them.
It's about making sure everyone's working towards the same goal.
Exactly. And that's where all that training and communication we talked about earlier is so important. It's not just about throwing a metric at someone. They need to understand what it means, why it matters, and how they can actually make a difference.
So it's about giving people the knowledge and the tools, not just expecting them to figure it out on their own.
Exactly. And what's really encouraging about this framework is that it recognizes how much we're still learning. This field is constantly changing. We're all figuring it out together as we go.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. The framework provides a strong foundation, but it's not meant to be set in stone. It needs to evolve as technology changes.
So as we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
For me, it's this. Sustainability isn't optional anymore. It's crucial, especially in a field as impactful as cloud computing. This framework gives us the tools to move beyond just talking about sustainability and actually building a future where technology and environmental responsibility go hand in hand.
It's an inspiring vision. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and let's keep working towards a more sustainable future, one step at a time.